Hey everybody, I'm writer and director Len Kabasinski of Killer Wolf Films, welcoming you to a brand new special Forgotten Movie Den podcast here tonight. Joe from Ozone Late Night, who always joins me on these things, thank God, because he's the man. Joe will be joining us momentarily. I'm giving you a quick update. Stuff is in the works, hopefully some filming sooner than later. I talked previously about Fear the Crimson Mask. We're working on the final act of that script. A lot of it's written. We're just trying to make the ending a little more probably doable, kind of thing. So more into that in another podcast, but not on a Forgotten Movie Den tonight. We'll save that for a Fist of the Filmmaker podcast. But that's in the last act being written. We'll see what happens there. We'll launch fundraisers, Indiegogo, that kind of thing, much like I've done the past several films here. So I'll keep you up to date on that in the coming weeks here. Demoniac, same thing. Although we're trying not to adjust the ending too much. I got to see digital effects wise how doable it is and things like that. It's meant to be, a surreal type effect at the end of the movie. I won't spoil anything, but I don't need Avatar effects in it. I just need it to not be laughable because it's not meant to be laughed at, right? We've been there before, right? I'm not trying to go for it this time. So Demoniac, Fear the Crimson Mask, those scripts are being worked on as we speak, kind of thing, and or effects are being worked on as we speak, and we'll see what happens. Demoniac's a little smaller in scale, probably would be accomplished first, but who knows with these things. It's all about, does it raise the money to get things done, and off you go and make a movie kind of thing. So, but those are on plate. We'll see what happens. Back to tonight. Again, Forgotten Movie Den episode. For those that don't know, the Forgotten Movie Den, we don't really rip on movies or do things like that. That's really not our thing. It's really more about highlighting something maybe you haven't heard of. In the past, we've done films like Thunder from 1983 with Trash from Bronx Warriors and stuff like that. So, I mean, those kinds of things, we're trying to bring movies to your attention maybe you haven't heard of. I bet you've heard of this movie. Anybody that's hung around independent horror and things like that probably know of this. Independent horror, I guess it's horror, comedy, action, thriller. It's a bunch of stuff. So, but you might know the movie if you really enjoy B movies and are watching this podcast for B movies. I bet you've heard of this one. It is kind of a 50th birthday celebration, as my birthday is tomorrow, Monday, July 22nd. So Joe was like, well, you should, pick a movie. Let's do a kind of birthday episode kind of thing. Well, I should probably pick, other than Gilbert Grape, this is probably my favorite movie of all time. We're going to get right to it. And lastly, before we bring in Joe, hopefully you're watching this podcast on my Patreon campaign, patreon.com/KillerWolfFilms. It is the very best way to support my works, past, present, future. All my films are on there. You can download nearly all of them, watch them when you want, put them in your video library, whatever. Some of them, recently, I have went through and done 4K upscaling with the help of Matt from the Salty Nerd podcast. Swamp Zombies 2 was released in a 4K upscale. Fist of the Vampire was 4K upscale. Just this month, a couple weeks ago here, Wendigo, Bound by Blood, was done in a 4K upscale. So I'm not going to say which one's next. We're working on it, but 4K upscaling will be a thing, and throughout the rest of this year and into next year, you'll see every couple months a new 4K upscale of my works being on there. But patreon.com/KillerWolfFilms is the very best way to support my works. Thank you so much. My YouTube channel, @TheRealLenK, is my newer channel. There's still tons of podcasts on that one now. I was canceled when YouTube and Google and whatever, Disney, whoever owns it anymore, canceled my last channel, but @TheRealLenK. Go subscribe to it. Enjoy all the videos on there. I appreciate it so much. So, as promised, right now we're going to bring in Joe from Ozone Late Night and get this show on the road. As promised, I now bring in the one and only Joe from Ozone Late Night. Joe, how is your summer going, my man?
It's going great. We're going to be talking about one of the most riotously fun movies that I think that both of us can think of. It's a birthday celebration, so happy birthday, Len. This is the perfect occasion to talk about this flick, man. So I'm doing great.
Yeah, I basically have two favorite movies, and they're both obviously wildly different from one another. One is more like, obviously, a more serious drama picture. As most people know, probably my favorite movie of all time is What's Eating Gilbert Grape. However, if I had to pick a 1A, 1B kind of thing, it would be tonight's movie that we're going to talk about that I've probably seen 300 times, as people have probably already guessed because I have my table or my little desk here decorated with the 4K and Digimax or whatever it's called DVD that was released several years back. We're going to talk about none other than one of my very, 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 very adored movies of mine, Dead Heat from 1988 to the Mark Goldblatt, and we're going to get to that gentleman in a minute who directed the picture. Joe, though, just to start off, I'm very, very excited we're doing this movie, so we couldn't celebrate, do a birthday podcast for me any better than talking about this film, which I just adore. Joe, when we watch Dead Heat, this is going to be, there's a lot to unpack. It's a horror, action, science fiction, thriller. What did we see, Joe?
Well, it is described, and you don't get many movies like this, as a buddy cop action zombie comedy, which is exactly what it is. It is about two LAPD police officers where we start off the movie. They're in the middle of trying to figure out who is doing all these robberies, and in the course of encountering two robbers, they discover that there is a much bigger and more supernatural, I guess, although maybe it's scientific. I guess it's not really supernatural, but a scientific reanimation plot that is going on right in the heart of LA with none other than Kolchak, the Night Stalker himself, Darren McGavin at its heart, along with one of the classics of horror films, a legend, Vincent Price. And man, this movie is packed top to bottom. There is not, you will run out of words to say how fun this movie is. Everybody involved is great. The movie itself is a riot, and the only bad thing I could possibly say about it is that we never got the sequel they talked about. That's my only complaint. Otherwise, dynamite flick, top to bottom. I love this movie.
Yeah, I'm so happy you love it, Joe, because it would hurt my heart because I adore this film, like I'm going to say many, many times throughout this podcast. I've seen it a zillion times with my mom that we watched it. We laugh at all the same jokes. It's almost like watching a film like Step Brothers. You know what the jokes are, but you watch it and you laugh again anyways. I think Dead Heat is much like that as well. But really, let's just hit the ground running, maybe at the ground level, so to speak. When we talk about the cast of this movie, which is absolutely incredible, not just production team, from effects artist to the director to the, and we'll get to Mark Goldblatt in a minute because he did another one of my favorite pictures, which I don't think is talked about enough either. But the cast, you mentioned Vincent Price. This is one of his final works. I would bet this is probably one of his, what would you say, Joe's last 3 or 4 movies, probably?
Yeah, that I think it's got to be in the last 5, probably, but definitely, because you can tell. I mean, he's definitely older. He still brings all that Vincent Price charm, though, man. I mean, he hasn't lost a beat, but it is definitely among his last roles for sure.
Yeah, and I believe Edward Scissorhands was his last picture, but this was, obviously towards the end, being in '88, probably made in '87, something like that. So we mentioned Vincent Price. Who is kind of the architect of this resurrection machine, this scientific thing that's bringing dead people back to life. But it comes with a caveat. You have to be you start to decay and stuff, or they haven't worked the bugs out of that yet. So we'll get into the little story elements like that later. But Vincent Price is on cue. Like you said, Joe, the Vincent Price charm is there. He's probably in 3-4 scenes maybe in the picture kind of thing. So he's probably on set for a few days kind of thing. Obviously shot in LA. I want to say the set they used was also used in a movie called Encino Man, with Pauly Shore and Frazier and stuff like that. I'm pretty sure it's the same building as Encino Man. Anyways. Not just that, you mentioned the Night Stalker, Darren McGavin, who I think eats up the scenery every scene he's in this movie. Darren McGavin's great. But I think we'd be taken back if we don't mention something like Key Luke is also in this movie. Master Po from Kung Fu. And also, I don't know what the hell his name is in Gremlins, Joe, but he's the owner of the Mogwai. The guy with the little shop where the Mogwai are, where Gizmo's at and stuff. But Key Luke's awesome.
And of course, we can't ignore the two guys at the top of the bill, which is what seems on paper to be a not great pairing if you were to read this and go, really, these two are going to headline the film? But then you watch it and you understand that it works the only way it possibly could. And that, of course, is Treat Williams and Joe Piscopo, who are perfectly cast, perfectly matched, and are the reason really that this movie works. There's no doubt about it. You could not have cast this any better.
Yeah, I totally agree. The chemistry between the two is fantastic, I think. And I think the weird thing when we get into is some production stuff about this movie, and I'm sure we're missing. You just mentioned Robert Picard. Picard, is it Picardo? That plays the one police captain.
Picardo, yeah.
Okay.
Picardo.
Yeah. He's in it in an early role. He's in a couple scenes. We've got the police captain, who's only in, I think, one scene, who really struggled apparently in production, even with his one scene. African American gentleman. I think he was also like a police captain in Cagney and Lacey, or it was from a television show. His name escapes me. He's long gone. But he's in it. I mean, you could talk about Professor Tanaka, another guy that's long gone. You would know him in Missing in Action 2 and all kinds of movies. The Perfect Weapon. He's the heavy villain in the Perfect Weapon film. But Professor Tanaka's in it as he plays a butcher, and really the special effects scene stealer of the movie. You could say it's that one, and then there's a decomposition scene of Lindsay Frost, I want to say is her name, who's still a working actor to this day. The cast you could go on for literally days talking about in this movie, Joe.
Oh yeah, and for an audience like we're gonna have here, and for people like us, this is an A-list cast. Some other people might just not describe it that way. I absolutely would. I'm sure you would agree. Yes, Professor Tanaka, who of course I always think of as Sub-Zero, now Just Zero from The Running Man. I went, this movie. The thing I like most about this movie, I'll be honest, is I tend to forget about it, and then when I remember it and I watch it every time, I think I can never forget about this movie again, and it slips in the background, and then I put it on, and it's thrilling and exciting, and it's one of those movies I'm glad I don't remember it, because it punches me every time, and I remember 10 minutes in, I'm like, yes, this movie is so great, and then it's just such a blast. It's the only way to put it. Is there are movies that are purely fun, where you understand that every part of it is working the way it's intended to. And that's exactly what Dead Heat is. It's one of those movies that within 5 minutes, you're in for that ride, and it goes right to what is the best ending for a buddy cop movie, or one of them, that any movie has. So really, we're just going to be gushing over it. But yeah, the cast is one of the highlights, because almost every other person is, I know this person from XYZ. Almost all of them are in multiple things, not necessarily A-listers again, but A-listers for people who like this kind of stuff. So again, the cast is, there's almost nothing I can complain about in this movie. Outside of that, we didn't get more of it. But other than that, it's sterling. This movie's great.
Well, let's talk about our two leads for a minute. We mentioned the late Treat Williams, as he passed away, last year, right, in a motorcycle accident. We have Treat Williams, who at this point had just gotten critical acclaim 5 years earlier, doing the Prince in the City. I believe that was a miniseries or something, right? Sidney Lumet, I think. I might be a little fuzzy on that, but yeah, he did Prince in the City. Probably 5 or 6 years before Dead Heat. So when he did that film, that was supposed to be the launching pad. He got critical acclaim from it. Everybody thought Treat Williams is the next, you name it, back then, Richard Gere, whoever, Treat was going to be that next it guy in Hollywood. And he had the looks for it and all that stuff. But even when you go back and you look at even more recent interviews with Treat Williams and things, he even said, I didn't take anything seriously. I was on cocaine all the time. I partied all the time, and I put more emphasis on that than my career. And I mean, Treat's been a working actor, or was a working actor for many years. But as you can see, he toiled around in B products for a while. Then he would get on a TV show. I forget. He was the dad in some show, Seventh Heaven, Dawson's Creek. I don't know. I don't watch that stuff. But it was one of those. He was on for quite a few seasons. But we mentioned Dead Heat and stuff, and when it was released to Dead Heat, which was released by New World had just got bought with another Mark Goldblatt film that we'll talk about in a second. And Dead Heat kind of got lost in the shuffle. It didn't really get a large theatrical release because, all the rights, everything's tied up. They don't know what they're doing. The company's going under. They're selling all their films and assets. And it's just like, oh, man, this film kind of got lost in the release shuffle. Now, would it have been a real big hit in '88? I mean, who knows? I mean, Piscopo's coming off some success with Saturday Night Live. I want to say Johnny, is he in Johnny Dangerously? I get some of those mixed up. He was in one of the, yeah. And New World apparently told the production team and Mark Goldblatt, from the director of this film, that, they're not making the movie without Piscopo. And it's funny that Treat, and I told you this prior to this podcast, Joe. I thought it was really interesting that here's Treat Williams, a guy everybody likes, that has these cocaine problems and stuff on set. And then here's Piscopo, who everybody sees as this jock, arrogant, Republican, ripped up guy. But he's really the grounded family guy in the whole situation, Joe.
If you didn't know any better, you're right to look at these two, and even the way the film positions them, because Treat is the handsome kind of Harrison Ford-esque leading guy with the suit and the tie, looks very clean cut, and then Piscopo is kind of the rough bruiser looking type, the big muscled guy. And so, yeah, if you take it, and this is, of course, a nice lesson about appearances and why you shouldn't read too much into them, but if you look at the two of them and say which one is the clean cut guy and which guy is on drugs and a little bit rough, you would have the opposite assumption based on the way they look. So, yeah. And you're right. We've talked about a number of actors in this Treat Williams type of situation where positioned for a big hit, they were going to be a breakthrough. Everybody thought so. They had the look. They had all the stuff. And whether it was a personal thing or bad marketing or bad timing, it just never worked out. And the Treat is another example of that. And it sucks because you can see the potential in these people. You can see that these individuals could have been helming their own movies for long, franchises, doing multiple things. And it's just whether it was from themselves or from outside factors, it just never happened. But you can see what others saw in them. And that kind of makes it, it's sad when the potential doesn't get realized. But then again, hey, we've got Dead Heat. So it wasn't for nothing.
It wasn't for nothing. We got Dead Heat. And you're right. I really, you mentioned Harrison Ford. I never thought of that, but wow, I can really see the similarity in that now. But yeah, we mentioned that Treat Williams would be really high on my list, the top 3 probably of actors that, what could have been kind of thing. It's not like he was an asshole. People liked him. Cast members liked him. He just couldn't get out of his own way with the partying and drugs and stuff. And he's the first one to say that. He didn't deny it. He was just like, yeah, I didn't take myself seriously. And, but he was still a working actor. He said he was fortunate to get into things. So, yeah, what could have been, you're right. Because we fast forward a couple years and Treat Williams would sneak into bigger budgeted released films. He even got a lead in a film that I just watched 2 weeks ago, and I thought, man, why don't we talk about this more often? And it's Deep Rising. Which I thought it was a really cool movie. I watched it again. I thought, man, some of the effects, it's 1995 or 1996 when Deep Rising comes out, but it was really good. And I thought, man, what could have been for Treat Williams? And to Piscopo, I mean, yeah, I don't think anybody really knew what to do with him. I think he's got the body of obviously an action star. I mean, he's probably 2 feet taller than somebody like Stallone and stuff like that. But I mean, so he had all that kind of stuff going for him. But I think some of the stuff with Joe Piscopo that I think hurt him, he didn't really promote Dead Heat. And again, it was hard because, like I said, the studio kind of didn't know what to do with it, and they were being sold, and everything was up in the air. But he really wanted to have Dead Heat be a film that his children could watch. So I think Dead Heat might have been sold to Piscopo as something that maybe it wasn't going to be made kind of thing. Maybe he thought it was going to be a zany, zombie, funny movie for, that was going to be rated PG and all this kind of stuff. I don't know. I don't know, Joe, but I think they probably lied a little bit to Joe to get him in. At that point, he's a popular name. But after this one, he would pop up in something like Sidekicks, where he's kind of a Martin Cove-ish villain in the Chuck Norris movie Sidekicks. But after that, I think when you look back at Joe Piscopo, it was kind of a, what do we do with him? The comedy that came from Saturday Night Live, and he was funny. Joe was funny on Saturday Night Live. They did pair him, obviously, with an early prime, up-and-coming Eddie Murphy at the time. Was he riding Eddie Murphy's coattails a little bit on the show? Yeah, maybe. But then he would get into like Mr. and Mrs. Weiner or something like that where he got to shine. And, I think Joe, looking back, they just didn't know what to do with Piscopo, dude.
Yeah, I always kind of think of him as the early version of somebody like The Rock, where, The Rock started out and he was doing a little bit more adult and mature and edgier stuff. And then once he got to a certain level, he said, okay, I want to always be the hero. I don't want to be a bad guy. I don't want to get killed. And he's done that for a while. And now I think he's kind of past that and he's going to start doing, I think, riskier stuff. And I feel like Piscopo didn't have enough clout for doing what he wanted to do at that point, but could have followed that trajectory. So you're right, though. You look at him and you tend to, when you hear, oh, comedian, you think of one type of person. Then you look at him and you think, oh, no, this is supposed to be an Arnold type. He's just big and he's got the brawn and everything, so we have to make him into an action star. But if he wants to make clean material, well, that wasn't really what was happening, especially in the 80s, is they weren't looking for clean material. They were looking for Conan the Barbarian or Rambo or something where somebody with muscles was going to be punching a hole through somebody else. And so, yeah, I think it may have been that what he wanted to do didn't square with what the industry was looking for out of somebody like him. So that was more of just an incompatibility thing where what the person wanted and what the studios wanted was never going to really work out. So that too seems like, because I think he's funny too, and in Johnny Dangerously, he is one of the most quoted parts of that movie. He's great, perfect in that film, and so maybe if there were more roles like that, that would have been where he went. But again, potential that we just didn't, maybe never lived up to what people thought it would be. So yeah, it's an interesting film in that way, where the two leads feel like they never got to the level that they seemed to be aiming for. And yet, like I said, neither of them suddenly didn't work anymore. They both managed to stick around in smaller roles maybe, but I don't think either of them would really complain about, oh, well, my career got destroyed after it. No, they went on. It's just maybe a different path than they envisioned for themselves.
Yeah, I agree with the assessment of Piscopo there for sure. And I look back and I can easily insert him into so many other, like, top of the bottom level, we'll say B movies, but they're still multi-million-dollar budget pictures. I could totally see him swapping out for Martin Kove in a movie like Project Shadow Chaser or something like that. There's so many other B movies I could see him in thinking, man, he could, but I just don't think Piscopo really embraced maybe the action, being the action star thing. And who knows if that was something possible or not. But I mean, with low budget cinema, the VHS boom back then in 88, 89, 90, all that stuff. I mean, there had to be room for Piscopo to do something there, kind of thing. I mean, Shadow Stevens made tracks, for Christ's sake. You know what I'm saying? So there had to be something for Joe. But I would have liked to have seen him gone that route and just see what happened, and maybe we get a Trax out of the deal. Maybe, we get something really awesome and off the wall and crazy. But yeah, let's move to one of the key figures, obviously, in this whole thing, and that's director Mark Goldblatt. Holy shit, Joe, what a career this guy has had. And I'm not talking as a director, because he only directed 2 movies, Dead Heat and the 1989 maybe, The Punisher, with Dolph Lundgren, which I love that movie. And again, I was a fan of the comic book and stuff like that. To me, the Punisher didn't need the skull on his shirt to look like a guy with a Hot Topic t-shirt running around. But that's a different podcast, Joe. But anyways, Goldblatt only directed Dead Heat, The Punisher, both by New World, both get buried because the company gets sold. I mean, did anybody get screwed over harder than Mark Goldblatt on his 2 first pictures, Joe?
He simultaneously is involved as an editor in some of the top level movies anybody's ever seen. I mean, Terminator 2, Commando, Rambo, the original Terminator. I'm just looking through all these, and it's incredible when you see all this stuff. I mean, it's just, as an editor, he has been involved in some of the most successful films that most people that listen to this show will have seen. And yet as a director, as you said, only 2 films. One, which I agree, I like the Dolph Lundgren Punisher. It's a different thing than the comic, but you know what? Sometimes different works, and I think it works. I certainly think it works better than having John Travolta as the villain, even though I do like Thomas Jane, but I don't like that movie. But I would take this Punisher over that one, hands down. And then Dead Heat, which is also a classic. I mean, when I said buddy cop action zombie comedy, I cannot think of something else that's quite like this. My double bill for this is The Hidden. I watch The Hidden and this, like back to back. That has been my twofer, because I'm like, they're not the same movie, but there's something about these movies where I'm like, yeah, these belong together. And so it is amazing that he didn't get to direct more. I don't know what the real story of that is, but again, potential that we didn't get. So I'm glad he was able to work as an editor on bigger films, but sure, I would have liked to see him do more stuff.
Yeah. For Mark Goldblatt, I'm serious, people watching the show. Go look up his IMDb stuff for his editing credits. You will be freaking amazed. It's a who's who, what's what of film. Like you said, Rambo, Commando, Terminator 2, all kinds of stuff. I think he's retired now. I think the last movie he did, don't quote me on this because I'm not looking it up, but I believe he edited the newer Death Wish movie. The Charles Bronson remake that Bruce Willis was in for Bronson and stuff. I don't think it was a Tarantino one. Maybe it was Eli Roth. Somebody did a newer Death Wish movie maybe about 7-8 years ago. I believe Mark Goldblatt directed that, or didn't direct it, edited that picture. But yeah, an amazing career. And to think, man, how is this guy that does all in edits and is involved in all these huge films, how is he not given more opportunities to direct? You give him Dead Heat, you give him The Punisher, the company gets sold and buries him, and it's like, well, you did all these awesome movies, just keep editing, screw it. And I thought, oh man, I think Mark Goldblatt, he should have got another shot at directing, in my opinion.
When you think about all the pieces involved, it is baffling that this movie isn't remembered in a better light, because I don't know anybody I know who watches it enjoys it. Nobody hates the movie, and yet it has this weird kind of, not bad reputation. I don't think anybody thinks it's bad, but it kind of gets lost in the middle. I myself just admitted that I tend to forget about it sometimes until I remember it, and then I get thrilled to watch it. And I don't know why that is. Maybe it's just like the cultural thing that's making me think, oh, Dead Heat, yeah, that one's okay, but it's not great. Yes, it is. It's great. So there is no explanation. There really isn't. When you look at all the ingredients for this, I've talked about how Fury Road, the reason I think that movie is such a masterpiece is because of the timing and the people involved. Because all the pieces were there to make that movie what it is. Because I happen to love Fury Road. And this seems like it should be that, where when you look at everybody involved, when you look at the story, when you look at the effects when this movie gets towards its end are unbelievable. They're so good. And so you sit here and go, how did this not make the career of everyone involved, Treat Williams aside because he had his personal problems, like you said, that's a different story. But everybody else, how did this not make their lives? Because it's all so well done. And I have zero explanation for it. I couldn't even begin to try to tell you.
Yeah, let's pick out some highlights. You mentioned the effects, and I mean, the big, I think, shock value thing of this movie is when you start to watch it, the cast is a who's who list of people that have done stuff. And I don't just mean B movies. They've done, big things. We mentioned Master Po, Key Luke, and not just Gremlins, but Kung Fu was huge with David Carradine in the 70s. He's Master Po, it's every scene you're like, oh, that's so-and-so from this. That's so-and-so from that movie. I remember that guy or that lady from this or that or this or that. But you mentioned the effects. I think we should pick maybe 3 because it's an effects-laden picture, people. It's a zombie thing where people are decaying and trying to solve their own murder before they decay into nothing. Joe, when you talk about the effects of this film, what's just one? I know there's a lot, but what's one that just jumps out in your mind?
It's honestly my 2 favorite things. It's a 50-50, but I'll say once Treat Williams becomes blown up zombified, I think he looks so good that this is what I mean about a sequel where he was like that. Because if you had told somebody watches this and didn't know, and you said, Treat Williams played the same guy in the end in the effects, people might not have believed it because he looks so different. And yet his physicality, it is him, and his physicality is so good. The makeup is great. He looks so sinister at that point when he's basically been the good guy of the two. We're kind of the clean-cut Agent Cooper type of the movie to a certain point. And now he looks like he has lost all fucks to give, and he's ready to just wreck the city. And he looks great. That's probably my favorite effect, is he looks so good as that decomposed, blown-up zombie version of himself that is tied with the woman melting, as you mentioned. The Lindsay Frost melt scene is sensationally good. But I would go with Treat Williams in his full zombified effect.
Yeah, I think mine is twofold. I think obviously the layup in all this, and this is maybe the show-stopping effects piece of the movie, is when Piscopo and Williams go to infiltrate Thul's deli or whatever it is, it's not a restaurant, but it's his deli, it's his meat shop or whatever, and then zombie ducks come alive, and there's a zombie bull that comes alive, and there's all the, it's crazy. It has to be seen to be believed. And there's no digital effects other than the the lightning coming out of the machine and stuff like that. But I think that's something that gets lost in pictures nowadays, Joe. In 1988, there wasn't a lot of really high quality digital effects stuff available. And you don't have it in this film. You see it a couple times and that's it. There's a lot of practical effects. So anybody that's into that kind of thing, this is your movie, because there's a ton of practical effects from start to finish in this movie. Stunt work, I think that's something that could be talked about. One of my all-time favorite stunts in any movie, Joe, is in Dead Heat. And it is when you said Treat Williams is decomposing. He just unzipped himself out of his own body bag and stuff. He hops on a police motorcycle. He is going to go after Laudermilk at the end. He drives his motorcycle. He gets clotheslined by a guard chain, flips off of his motorcycle, goes through a window, slides across the floor, and shoots the guards. And dude, how cool is that?
Oh no, I agree. This is what I mean about this movie should be better known. And but also the thing about the effects work, and this does go into, to some degree, the editing. So it is kind of interesting that Goldblatt would go on to be an editor. Is one thing, this isn't necessarily purely editing, but one thing I really like about this movie is that it doesn't waste a lot of time explaining things. It assumes you're smart enough to be along for the ride. You start and they're already on the trail of these robbers. And then for me, what the place where this movie shifts into high gear really is when they go to that institute and they find that monster with the two faces. At that point, the movie is played around with the idea of, okay, these people are clearly, are these resurrected people? Is there a mistake by the corner? Like, they're dancing around it, even though we've seen these people get shot a bunch of times, the robbers, and they survived for a while. And when that one guy gets rammed with the car, talk about a beautifully done effect. That car ramming scene is sensational. It's perfectly done. There's obviously a dummy involved, but the editing is so tight. It's done so well. It's one of these things where you do that scene wrong, and it's very obvious it's done wrong. You do it right, and it's like this, and it's fantastic.
Right? You're like, how, holy shit, it's that moment where, the gasp, holy shit, yeah, and that with the ramming of the car with a zombie jewel thief kind of thing is amazing. But I think this deserves special highlight, and you mentioned it, Joe. The movie, well, let's liken it in terms of a tone shift to something like From Dusk Till Dawn. From Dusk Till Dawn, we have maybe a gritty crime drama kind of thing going on, and then we get to the titty twister and holy shit, what happened? It's a vampire movie. Well, you mentioned the scene when they go to the research center and Joe Piscopo and Treat Williams take on this biker ghoulish guy with like 8 faces and things like that. It's crazy. All practical effects, people. When that happens, the movie has shifted into, this is going to be an all-out, just crazy-ass bonanza of a film from this point on, Joe.
Yeah, because it really goes from being kind of a mystery, police procedural a bit for a little while, even though there's some kind of fantastical elements. But once that happens, then the movie just goes full-bore zombie. It's like, okay, no, this is what it is, and this is where we're going. And immediately within 3 minutes of that starting, Treat Williams is dead, he's resurrected, and we're off and running. Like, that's it. Now the movie is about this. And they give him the 48 hour, I think it's 12 hours, 12-hour time limit before he dies. And so now you have the ticking clock, and one of our characters, you're sure he's going to survive, which, news for you folks, this movie ends with all of the main cast dead. Does Vincent Price see? I'm still unclear on whether Vincent Price died in the explosion or if he was supposed to maybe be left ambiguous for a sequel. My guess is they were leaving him ambiguous, but everybody else is wiped out. I mean, they're all dead by the end of the movie. Yeah,
I mean, if we had to guess, even his Arthur P. Laudermilk character, speaking of Vincent Price's character, he's looking kind of frail. The charm is there. He's got a great white suit and things like that. But at the end, I think he's probably dead. The resurrection machine is blowing up, and it's a smaller room and things like that. However, like you said, if there was a sequel, of course somebody you want that name value to come back. I mean, Vincent Price is more popular than anybody in the cast, even at that point when we talk about Piscopo's popularity or whatever. Obviously, Vincent Price is the show-stopping actor out of all of them kind of thing. But Yeah, I don't know, but you're right. I think they wanted him to survive or be ambiguous, just enough in case there was a sequel, which we knew with New Line that was never going to happen, kind of thing. But the effects go on and on and on. We have the decaying corpse of Lindsay Frost's character, where she decays in like a spa area of her, I guess it's not a mansion, but it's a really, really nice house she's in. There's a lot of cool stuff in this movie, Joe, and you mentioned a sequel. I don't even know how we'd brainstorm how to do it. I mean, if you had to pick how you develop a sequel for Dead Heat, I mean, what would you do, Joe?
Well, I had read that the writer, they basically had initially started to develop a sequel, and the writer himself had said, yeah, and he had said, well, how? They're all dead. And I guess the producer, if that's who it was, whoever it was that was in discussion, said, you made a movie with a resurrection machine. Do I have to spell this out for you? Aren't you the writer? And he went, oh, yeah, I guess there could have been another one. And that does make sense. You could have brought them back, I guess, again. Look, you can do it however you want. Had the desire been there, I don't think either of us would care how they did it. You could just ignore the fact that they died, because you don't really see them die. It's a beautiful ending because they kind of walk into this misty cloud thing, doing a line from, kind of a classic line. This could be the end of a beautiful friendship. But would I watch a movie where both of them were in their zombified makeup? Yes, I would. So whatever reason, whatever excuse you got to get me there, I'm there. So yeah, would we have kind of looked a little funny at it and gone, okay, well, they were all dead, but whatever. But honestly, if this team had come back, all these people, would you care? Because I know I wouldn't.
No, fuck no. No, God, no. No, I'd be the first in line, Joe. And you know what? The thing I find, mildly strange about this is we're talking about this is released in 1988. We're in the middle of a booming VHS. You don't have to go to the movie theater anymore, Joe, to make a profit. Roger Corman taught everybody this. You can go direct to video and turn massive profits with the right, controlled budget kind of thing. I believe Dead Heat had a budget of like 3 or 4 million. So I'm sure it made that back kind of thing. But even if it wasn't a big theatrical success and things much like this one we're talking about, the video market was there. And I think, man, I believe The Punisher, just to give a correlation here, The Punisher that Mark Goldblatt directed as well with Dolph Lundgren, I think that was filmed like 2 years before it actually got released because of the sale of New World and stuff. And I think that probably had a lot to do with things. But I like what you said, because as a writer, Pressman, I don't know who produced it. It's somebody like that. Anyways, right, you're the writer. Fucking write something. I mean, I'm in. As a fan, I'm in regardless. But, with that strong straight-to-video market in that time frame in 88 and 89, there's a missed opportunity there, Joe.
Yeah, I agree. I think this is actually perfectly suited to a string of direct-to-video sequels, because the truth is you don't have to go too much, you don't have to go too overboard with the concept. You could have it where they are the perfect cops for the LAPD now because they can't die. They've figured out some way to extend their resurrection by 10 years. You don't even have to make it infinite. You just say, okay, we managed to, the new version of the machine that Loudermilk was working on but hadn't finished the prototype of, extends your life by 10 years. But you're now invulnerable. So they are now the elite detectives on the force because they can walk into a room with a bunch of drug dealers and get shot and just sew themselves back together. And then you make a comedy out of that. Why? Just stick with the idea of the zombie buddy cop comedy. That's great. I would watch a ton of that shit. That'd be fantastic.
I can already see the opening scene of Dead Heat 2, where they're indestructible cops going into some drug den or something like that, doing an impossible mission where they're just getting shot to hell, and then, I can see it, Joe. This is one of my true cinematic sad faces that we don't have a Dead Heat 2 kind of thing. And of course, we don't have Treat anymore, but Piscopo, I think, is still around out of this whole cast. Lindsay Frost is still around. Piscopo's still around. Obviously, McGav and Key Luke. Key Luke was already, I think, 85 years old when he did this movie. Much like Vincent Price, who was very, very elderly when he did this movie. You know, I've got the 4K sitting right in front of me, and there's some fascinating trivia of it. Apparently, the editor of this film, we all know who edited this. It's like when we talk about Poltergeist, and it's either Tobe Hooper's film or it's Steven Spielberg's film. And I think we probably really know who was at the helm of Poltergeist. But anyways, Dead Heat, kind of similar in fashion. There's a really telling interview on the 4K from the editor, or, editor, I put that in quotations, how he was a friend of Mark Goldblatt's, and then Mark Goldblatt kind of took over his editing, and they had disagreements, and it kind of really ruined their friendship. And that happens from, micro budget indie cinema. I've seen it. Nearly every single picture I've done, and I've done 16 or 17 movies. It happens. But it happens all the way up the chain to the billion-dollar budget movies, And Dead Heat, on the 4K, there's an interview with the editor, and he said that, Mark became untrustful of him. But I also think Mark Goldblatt, to work on the projects he's worked on as an editor, you're probably a perfectionist. You don't reach that level of stuff, that volume of just hits over and over and over again. We should add up all the revenue that his movies have generated. It'd be crazy, Joe.
Yeah, and as you know, and anybody who has even a little bit of insight into how filmmaking is done knows, editing is probably not as important as directing, but boy, oh boy, is it important. And we both talked about that car ramming scene. Part of what makes that work is the editing. So yeah, based on Goldblatt's resume, do I think he knew what he wanted his scenes to be? I absolutely do. And if he saw that it wasn't, you probably can say the same thing. If you see something for your movie and it's not happening the way you want it to, and you have the capability to do it yourself, well, guess what? You're going to do it yourself, because in the end, that film represents your vision. And if somebody else can't make it happen and you can, then you'll make it happen. And so this doesn't shock me that there's a credited editor who may not have actually edited most of the film. Because again, Goldblatt was not unfamiliar with what editing was. So if he didn't see what he wanted to see, then if I was him, and there'd be a point where I'm like, well, friendships are good, but I have to get this movie made the way I need to get this movie made. So I will just do what I have to do. So it makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah, no, I don't disagree with that. You see it in music. You see it in any kind of like group collaboration kind of stuff. You get somebody that has that vision that they're not going to let go of. I've probably done the same thing. I think I've gotten a little more collaborative throughout the years as I get older, and I'm going to be 50. But in the beginning, sure, I had tunnel vision with even my shittier early films and stuff. I still had a vision and a plan and stuff I wanted to execute in those things. And I can see it here. And I don't know how you categorize this movie. I think if you put it in Blockbuster Video, to be honest, I'm betting it was probably in the action movie section. But what do you think, Joe? If you had to pick one, the success of Dead Heat is riding on your choice here, Joe. Is it a comedy? Is it an action? Is it a horror film?
I think I would ultimately put it into the horror category. I think it is a comedy, but I would not market it as a comedy. And I don't know that there's enough, because at the time this came out, an action film had a certain pedigree. You went into an action film expecting it to be a Commando or something like that. And this is not a complaint, this is not a criticism, but that's not this movie. This movie's action serves the narrative in a way that isn't with most action films, where it's like, okay, we need big explosions and we need that to happen every 10 minutes. And there's going to be some, bunch of people shooting at each other, whether it's necessary or not. Whereas the best shootout in this entire film is where it's at the end, where the zombified version of Treat Williams is shooting the guy in the decompression chamber, and they're just unloading Uzis into each other for a solid 2 minutes. And it's hilarious. That reminded me of in Big Trouble in Little China when Thunder blew up, when he exploded. I went, this is just, and again, what would you categorize Big Trouble in Little China as? You can't fit it into one thing, because it is a comedy, it's action, there's horror elements. So, but if I was doing it, if I ran the video store, it would go into horror for me, because I think that audience would love this film.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. I'm going to put up the artwork here for it right now. But look at that artwork. And it's the 1988 VHS release. There's no zombies. There's no nothing. There's an exploding ambulance that's, in midair crashing. There's Joe Piscopo looking all, big and pointing his handgun. We have, just like every other 80s picture on a VHS cover for an action film, somebody's got an Uzi or a machine gun or a MAC-10 or something like that, which is Treat Williams in this case. There is no alludement to any horror type stuff in this movie on the cover. So I think when they were trying to market it, and maybe this is, a faulty thing on their behalf, I think they marketed it as an action movie because they didn't know what else to do with it. You're right. They probably should have marketed it as a horror movie because that fan base is kind of unforgiving, is a little, I shouldn't say unforgiving. They are more forgiving than some of the other fan bases, and we're talking about comedy and action. But that artwork, I don't know if you've pulled it up, Joe, the 1988 VHS release, it looks like an action movie.
Yeah, it's awful. I really, this is, I think, misleading. And I think somebody who came into this expecting a traditional action buddy cop movie would be disappointed. And I think if you didn't know it was what it actually was, you would pass on it. So at the very least, the one easy change to this, to at least get somebody interested, is make Treat Williams slightly zombified. So that okay, there's something else to this. You don't have to make him full on. You want to save that for when people are watching it for that full on end stuff. But make him slightly pale, give him the kind of, the dark around the eyes. Maybe there's some bullet holes in him. And you sit there and go, okay, wait a minute. This isn't just a standard action film. What is this? And that enough would probably get somebody to watch it and know what they're getting.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Or do like the beginning of the Incredible Hulk TV show. Where Bill Bixby and Hulk at the end of the opening scene credit sequence, it's a half and a half thing. Maybe half of Treat's face is decomposing and stuff like that, and the other half just looks like him. Something to give some kind of horror element to it. The comedy, I don't know how the hell you're going to put that on there's so much going on in this movie. I don't know where you're going to really sell that element to it because nobody in the cast is... Go ahead.
No, Piscopo sells you that because at that time he would have been known.
You're right.
So all you need is him on the cover.
Yes, you're right. Piscopo sells that. You're right. The casting of Piscopo sells that. Piscopo sells that element. The rest of it, up in the air. It's up to some artwork. Put in some zombie stuff. Even the 4K release in front of me here has Piscopo and Treat Williams. I'm showing the audience this. They're back to back with guns and stuff. The resurrection machine's there. But even on the 4K release, that's all we get. We get the resurrection machine and we get Piscopo and Treat Williams back to back with guns. There's nothing on the back. There's no pictures. There's no nothing. The 4K release, I will say, and I feel like this happens a lot, Joe, in 4K Ultra HD releases. I got the Predator Ultra HD release. And you know what? There's shining moments in that release of Predator. And we're talking about a major budget film. Everybody knows what Predator is. But there's also moments where you're like, man, the grain and crap in this isn't really that good. So you can tell they shot Predator with a couple different cameras. They didn't have the footage that they needed to make it look super pretty. And you get some moments in Predator's 4K release where you're just like, oh man, this isn't that great. Dead Heat suffers from the same thing. They probably didn't have a lot of footage to pull from on certain things. But I will say, the big moments in Dead Heat where you want that 4K, they hit. You're talking about the resurrection machine and Thul's deli there. That's amazing. We talk about the decomposition of Lindsay Frost's character. That's amazing. There's a lot of cool stuff in there. But like I said, if I bring this up, Joe, because Jaws 3 and Jaws The Revenge, Jaws 4, are coming to 4K Ultra HD tomorrow, I believe. Tomorrow and I think Tuesday. They're released back to back. And there's already been a lot of stuff online saying that Jaws, the producers of these new 4Ks, used AI for the background. Well, Joe, I don't care what you shot the film on, but if you're zooming in 10,000% to somebody sitting in a stands 800 yards away from what's really happening in the film, it's probably not going to look super great when you zoom into it times 10,000, Joe.
Yeah, this has become kind of an unfortunate thing where, and look, I think anybody who appreciates film wants their favorite movies to be as presented as well as they can be. I think that's obviously, you want it to look as great as possible. But at the same time, compared to, and Predator is a good example. I had I think the first Blu-ray, not the 4K, but the first Blu-ray they put out for Predator. And the banding in the sky in scenes at times was so bad, it was next to unwatchable. So there is a point where I remember watching VHS. You had no clarity on that. In fact, you had some major warping depending on how you were watching it. So, I think at times, Dead Heat's a good example. It may not look stellar the whole way through, but we're getting far better versions of these, and especially because you have extras on that 4K. I'm happy to support this movie's existence in any way it is. If it's not the best 4K I've ever seen, I'll let it go. That's okay. If Predator's not the best one, hey, it's still Predator, man. So whatever, I'm in. So again,
it's still Predator, right?
Too many people, in my opinion, and maybe it's because they want hits on their YouTube channel with outrage and all the rest of that stuff. They get way over concerned with, oh yeah, there's digital whatevering in the back. Okay, I don't care. We used to not have this. If you didn't own the VHS because the store closed and you took it, you had nothing. So I will take whatever we've got.
Yeah, and I'll stand by this. This is another show in its entirety, but I'll stand by this till the day they plant me, Joe. But Jaws the Revenge has some gorgeous cinematography in it. Gorgeous. I think the score is amazing by Small, and I think the cinematography in Jaws the Revenge is great. But anyways, different show. To wrap up Dead Heat, Joe, this is a hard one to unpack to anybody trying to view it. I think most of the people watching this show here, The Forgotten Movie Den, probably, if you're hanging around Red Letter Media, if you came over from them to watch this or whatever, you've probably heard of Dead Heat, but maybe you haven't watched it. And this is what I try to do in the Forgotten Movie Den is get out there and watch this film, people. It's on Tubi. It's free right now to watch. I don't know if I'm sure it's in HD on Tubi. But anyways, get out there and watch this, people. Be in the right frame of mind that this is, probably at its heart, Joe, this is probably a comedy film. But, have that in mind. But, Joe, to sum up, if you were pitching Dead Heat to somebody that didn't know anything about it, what would you tell them?
Honestly, and some people might think this is blasphemy, but whatever, I'll stand by this comparison. I align this movie a lot in the way that it feels to Evil Dead 2. And you're pointing out the scene in the slaughterhouse or whatever with the animated animals immediately reminds me of Evil Dead 2 with like the laughing head on the wall and all that type of thing. And I think this is in that vein. This is using really, really great practical effects combined with a story that has these light moments, but also has this seriousness and has these two perfectly paired characters where I think the description I gave is the perfect way to sell it. This is a rare buddy cop action zombie comedy film that works and has just really no flaws that I can really point out in its execution. I think it's expertly done. Perfect casting, great editing, probably by the director, great directing, great effects. And so I think what you pointed out as far as that cover is the biggest detriment is most people would look at this thing and think it's just a rip-off buddy, like a Lethal Weapon ripoff. And that is not what it is. It is so much more than that. And so, as you said, you can watch this for nothing. Nothing. Go to Tubi. You don't even need an account. Just watch it. It is absolutely worth it.
Yeah, and you're right. That artwork, right, that's making it seem like you're going to get into like a Lethal Weapon. And anybody watching it, I love Lethal Weapon, but I don't love Lethal Weapon like I love Dead Heat. But anybody getting into it expecting Lethal Weapon and stuff would be obviously very, very disappointed and probably be like, what the fuck did I just watch? kind of thing. But yeah, to me, if I'm selling this picture, I mean, at its heart, like I said, I believe it wants to be, a comedy picture. Whether that's intentional or not, only Mark Goldblatt could answer that one. But, Grindhouse films are ending right around this time, Joe. One of the last Grindhouse films I think we probably had was William Lustig's Maniac Cop. Starring Bruce Campbell and the late Robert Z'Dar there. But I feel like this has that feel to it. It's a little slicker because the effects are just so good in it that it doesn't, I don't want to say sink to Grindhouse level because the production's too slick. But at the same time, the zany story and all the action and effects and everything in there, it likens it to that late phase Grindhouse kind of film kind of thing. Except Grindhouse is always, gritty and like Maniac Cop, set in New York. Everything's depressing. Everything's drab. In this film, everything's like a comic book. Everything's bright. It's sunny. It's California. All that kind of stuff. This is something that never saw, and I know somebody will chime in on YouTube. I appreciate you that you're going to say, oh, I saw this in Chicago at the theaters when it came out. Yeah, I know. If you didn't live in LA, Chicago, or New York, you probably didn't see this movie in the movie theaters, though. And I think this is a fun one. And I think it'll be one of the most unique cinema experiences you could have if you're a horror fan. And Joe, this is maybe one of my favorite kind of analogies you've made on how many episodes have we done at Forgotten Movie Done? Tons together, right? And I think one of my favorite things you've ever said is tonight, Joe. I never got this, but now I see it. This is like Evil Dead 2, Joe.
Yeah, I mean, that really is, there's the thing I like about, or one of the things, I shouldn't say the thing, one of the things I like about this movie is I feel these connections to other films through it. Not because I think they're better, but because I feel like it's got that spiritual tie. So like I said, The Hidden, there's Evil Dead 2. There is kind of I think of things like even Romero with the zombified thing and some of the stuff like that. Like there's all these little pieces that add up to this movie outside of the fact that, and we both said this multiple times, and it bears repeating, this cast is stellar and they were cast just right. And so it almost, whether intentionally or not, as I look at it today, this is a love letter to B-movie filmmaking because it doesn't feel like it's trying to be, a top-end Terminator level, A-level film, but it has respect for what it is and it executes itself in what would, honestly, almost a flawless way, including one of the better endings for a film of this type that exists. I love the ending of this movie. I think it's fantastic. It's a perfect ending.
I agree 100% there, Joe. I think it's a great ending, but it's also an ending that, my mother was a very typical American cinema goer. She wanted good guy, bad guy, happy ending to everything kind of thing. I'm not sure this is... I think it's a happy ending, but at the same time, everybody's dead at the end of this movie. And, we talked about a sequel and that kind of stuff. And listen, Joe, you know this. I don't have to tell you this, but I'm going to say it to everybody anyways. Godzilla died in 1954, right? He died from the hydrogen bomb or whatever. But when something makes money, it always comes back. No matter what. Now, Dead Heat didn't make any money because, like we said, the company was sold and it got put into limbo and everything. So it didn't really have a chance to do any of that. But a different time as well. We're talking about 1988, 89 kind of thing. It's if I had to pick one film that I would want to have a sequel, Joe, honestly, this would be my number one pick. I've already had American Ninja sequels. I've already had Cyborg Cop and Project Shadow Chaser and all kind, Kill Bill and all kinds of movies I would have wanted to have sequels. I've already had them, Joe. But the one thing I've never had in my life is Dead Heat 2.
And something just occurred to me now that we're wrapping up as we've talked about this film and we've talked about how it was probably tough to market and it what was this thing supposed to be? But you know what? Now that we're so far after it and it exists, this is actually something I think is a strength of the film, is I don't know what else I can really compare it as a one-to-one to. It is its own thing. And when you have movies like this that have their own identity and are well made and can stand on their own premise and everything involved, then that's rare. It's rare that you can point at a movie like this and say, what else is like this? Show me a movie like this made better. You can't because nobody ever tried it again. So you know what? I'm fine with that. We only get one of them. It's a great example of itself because there's nothing else to compare it to. It is literally incomparable. So what better thing can you say about it? I
agree. And that is, I guess, a selling point to me. I'm telling the audience on YouTube, on Patreon, if you're even thinking about watching Dead Heat, hey, it's free. Just go try it. Once you see the opening scene, you're going to be hooked. But just wait till the giant guy comes out with the 8 faces and wrestles Piscopo. And anyway, just watch the movie. But you won't see another movie quite like Dead Heat. I think me and Joe both agree on that one. Joe, when people want to find your stuff and want to learn more about the awesome Joe from Ozone Late Night, where can they go?
Very, very simple. You can go to ozonenightmare.com. In fact, as a bit of a promo, I have a 5-hour episode coming up on RoboCop 2 and Predator 2, which are two movies I obviously had a lot of fun talking about. So yeah, it's everything's there. You go there and you will find everything that I do, and hopefully we'll enjoy it.
For Joe from Ozone Late Night, I'm writer and director Len Kabasinski of Killer Wolf Films. I hope you've enjoyed this episode. I hope it at least nudges you in the direction to go and watch one of my all-time favorite movies. People always think it's ninja movies and this kind of stuff. No, my two favorite movies of all time are What's Eating Gilbert Grape and Dead Heat. Two wildly different movies on the opposite ends of the cinematic spectrum. But those are my favorites. Take care, everybody. We will see you soon.